What's going on, everybody? A few months ago, I made a video talking about why Prague is an amazing place to live. And I honestly stand by everything I said in that video, talking about safety, transportation, things to do, all these different things that make me love living here in this city. But I think that every city in the world has its pros and cons, and no place is truly perfect. So today in this video, I want to talk about 5 negatives of living here in Prague. All right, so the sun just came out as I'm starting to talk about the negatives of the city, so that gloomy feeling is gone. But I'm gonna get started anyway with number 1, which is the cost of living to the local salary ratio here in Prague. And this is honestly a global issue where the salaries aren't really matching how much it costs to live these days. So there's definitely problems financially for a lot of people, but that's a specific problem here in Prague as well. I recently read this study that showed Prague has one of the worst housing markets in Europe, if not the worst housing market in Europe. And that's not to say it's more expensive. So places in Western Europe like Amsterdam and London and Paris, all these places have higher rent costs. But when you compare the local salary to that cost, it's much worse here in Prague. So at the end of 2023, the average salary was around 43,000 Czech crowns. I'm gonna start speaking in euros so it makes sense for everyone watching this video, which is about 1,750 to 1,800 euros per month. And that's gross, so before taxes are taken out. But the cost of living for housing isn't very comparable to that. So I currently live in a studio apartment. It's like almost a 1-bedroom, there's a loft bed, but it's basically a studio apartment with my girlfriend. And our rent is around 20,000 Czech crowns, which is about 850 euros per month. So if you're doing the math, if you're an average person who wants to live here in Prague and you want to live on your own in a studio apartment that's similar, it's going to cost you about half or more than half of your monthly salary just to pay the rent prices. So obviously, unless you have a really high paying job here, then you're going to have a roommate or a partner that you live with. And even then, if you go to 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms and just get 1 room in the house, it's still gonna be pretty expensive compared to what you're earning. So that's definitely a problem here that is really struggling to find a solution at the moment. All right, I had to break out the sunglasses to finish point number 1. And obviously the housing market's an issue, but also just things in general, the costs are going up. And once again, this is a global problem. But if you go to the grocery store, you go to restaurants, bars, the price of things have been increasing steadily. So hopefully your salaries increase steadily as well. If not, you're definitely gonna have trouble financially here compared to other cities throughout the world and in Europe in general. But all right, enough financial talk, especially because if you have a higher salary, it probably isn't as relevant to you as it is for some people. But moving on to point number 2, and it's kind of ironic to talk about because it's a sunny, nice day here. It's almost summer, but I want to talk about the harsh and dark winters in Prague. Now, this probably isn't news to a lot of people that the Czech Republic has cold winters. I mean, they're in the middle of Europe with snow, obviously. They love hockey and winter sport, all that stuff. The main issue I have living here is that it's so dark all the time. So yeah, I come from a country and I lived growing up with snow and dark winters. But in Prague, the sun would rise at like 8 in the morning and it would set by like 4 p.m. So essentially your 2/3 of the day is in darkness. So if you're working a Monday through Friday job, 8 to 4, 9 to 5, you're waking up, going to work in the dark, and you're leaving work in the dark, not seeing the sun at all. And this was going on for months and months. So I just felt like it was very long and overwhelming being in the darkness so much. All right, now before moving on to my 3rd point, I kind of want to show you this cool like kayaking, canoeing setup they got going on here. It's kind of interesting. There actually seems to be this kayaking competition going on right now. They have these like man-made rapids here and they're doing these things. I got to go through the gates. It's kind of interesting to see. Anyway. So let's move on now to my 3rd point, and I don't want this to be controversial or to offend anybody, just based on my experiences, but I found that it's kind of difficult to make friends with Czech locals here. And that's obviously a generalization. Everyone who lives in Prague and the Czech Republic can be different, have different personalities, etc. But basically, I think that there's a stereotype going around that Czech people are cold and mean to you. And I want to say that I don't find that to be the case necessarily. It's not really true. I think that Czech people are just very reserved. Basically, they don't want you to ask too many questions about their personal life, and in return, they're not going to ask you that many questions about your personal life. So it's kind of hard to get that ball rolling unless you spend a lot of time with someone to kind of get to know them and become good friends. So basically, like when you travel around Eastern Europe or Asia or South America, people are going to ask you, where are you from? Like, why are you here? What do you like? What do you do? All these types of things. And I found that in the Czech Republic, that just doesn't kind of happen as easily. So you really got to like break someone down and really get to know them a lot better before you can have those deeper friendships. So not saying that it's not possible and that everyone's different, but I think that a lot of my friends in the end have turned out to be expats who are also here in Prague, because it's been easier for me to connect with them than it is with local Czech people, even if they do speak English and all that stuff. And my fourth negative about living in Prague actually might have something to do with the third point, which is the fact that it's extremely touristy here, especially during the summer and during December at the Christmas markets times. So I think that if you're someone who's local from Prague, you're not gonna want to always be making friends with foreigners, because you don't know if they're here for a day, for a week, or 2 weeks, and you're not gonna have those deeper friendships with someone because you have your life with your Czech family and your Czech friends. So it's harder to get past that opening stage, I guess. But that's what I want to talk about next, is the tourism. So during the summer and during Christmas markets, it gets flooded with people. All of the main areas, the Charles Bridge, Old Town Square, Wenceslas Square, the Prague Castle, all of those places get overrun with tourists. So as someone who's living here, I tend to avoid those areas during high season. Basically, I never try and walk across the Charles Bridge unless it's early morning or it's off season, because there's so many people and suitcases and pictures being taken. It's kind of chaotic. So if you're living here, the tourism bits aren't as great unless it's the off season, basically is what I'm trying to say. And one more thing I want to say about the tourism point is that it definitely also raises the prices in certain parts of the city. So if you're living here and you want to go out to eat in Old Town Square on Prague 1, it's going to be inflated tourism prices because they know they're spending money and they're around more often in that area. So it's definitely difficult, and you got to kind of learn which parts of the cities are for you so you can avoid the crowds, get lower prices, and kind of work around tourism, because Prague is one of the most visited cities in Europe every year. So there's a lot of people coming from all over. So it's cool because you can meet a lot of people, but it's also crowded and can be inflated prices if you don't know where to go. All right, that fourth point might have been a little bit rambly, so my apologies. I'm now gonna move on to my fifth and final negative of living here in Prague. And this one specifically is more about the startup in Prague than it is about living here full time. And I've just found that, or I experienced this. There's a lot of bureaucracy when it comes to initially getting set up in Prague. There are different visas and things to know, but basically I was on the freelancer visa. That's how I got a visa to live here in the Czech Republic. And as a freelancer visa, you have to do so many things before you can finally be approved, and it takes months and months of time and energy, and it's honestly pretty stressful. So basically the bureaucracy was crazy. It was like, the only way to get it is if you have a local address in the Czech Republic. So you have to come here on a tourist visa and get an apartment in Prague before you're even approved for a visa. So a lot of the landlords don't want to do that because they don't know if you're going to get approved and stay. So it's kind of like a risk on their end. And then when you actually do get everything all in place, the only way to get the visa is to leave the country and go somewhere else, apply at an embassy outside of the country, get approved before you come back into the Czech Republic. So it was like, I already am here in Prague, I have an apartment, I'm basically living here as a tourist almost without my visa approved yet. Then I had to go to Dresden, Germany, go for an interview and apply there. Then I had to wait like a month or two from that point and then go back there, pick it up. And then when you got back into the Czech Republic, I had to go, within 3 days, you go to the police station and talk to them so that they approve that you're in their neighborhood, and they basically finalize everything. And now that situation might not really apply to you if you're being sponsored on a typical work visa by your employer, or if you have an EU passport. It's going to be different for you. That was specific to me, but just kind of a weird situation. It kind of showcases that there's a lot of like strange legal and bureaucratic matters that are different here in the Czech Republic. So if you're coming and starting a business, or if you have problems with a landlord or other situations, it can be difficult to kind of understand and figure out what to do in those cases. So just know that if you're coming here, it's not always straightforward in the legal realm, I would say. But all right, that was a lot of talking. Thank you for bearing with me on some of those points, because I can kind of get going on a topic and not stop. But those are 5 negatives about living in Prague, Czech Republic. However, I do want to reiterate that I talked about a lot of positives in my last video about this. And I think that it overall is a great city to live in, one of the best in the world in my opinion, but nowhere is perfect, and there's certain things that can be improved on. So I just wanted to give the entire picture of this city of Prague. But overall, I love it here.